My crazy ex isolated me from everyone I ever loved, until someone loved me enough to stay. My brother's wedding invitation arrived with my name crossed out in red ink, not returned to sender, not declined politely, physically defaced with a thick red marker and mailed back to my apartment. Across the front, someone had written in block letters, "Family doesn't want you there." I stood in my kitchen holding the ruined invitation, hands shaking, trying to remember the last time I'd spoken to Cameron. 6 months, maybe 7. He'd stopped returning my calls after Thanksgiving, after what Victoria told him I'd said about his fiancée, except I never said those things. Never said any of the things Victoria claimed I'd said. But by the time I figured that out, I'd lost everyone who mattered, everyone except her, and one other person who refused to leave no matter how hard Victoria tried to drive her away. I'd been working as a physical therapist at a sports medicine clinic in Denver for 5 years when I met Victoria Lang at a charity fundraiser. I wasn't the type who went to fundraisers. My friend Jordan had dragged me along, said I needed to get out more, meet people, stop spending every weekend hiking alone. Victoria was sitting at our table, black dress, blonde hair pulled back, bright smile that made her entire face light up. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled constantly, had stories about every city she'd visited. We talked about travel, about treating athletes with chronic injuries, about her experience running a half marathon the previous spring. She asked intelligent questions about my work, seemed genuinely interested in rehabilitation techniques, mentioned she'd been considering physical therapy for a shoulder injury from a skiing accident. I gave her my card. She texted me before I left the venue. The first 3 months felt like the beginning of something significant. She was attentive, thoughtful, remembered details about my patients and my family, brought me coffee on mornings when I mentioned having early appointments, left little notes in my apartment when she stayed over, encouraging messages about upcoming presentations or difficult cases. My sister Rachel met her twice and seemed cautiously optimistic. My brother Cameron liked her immediately, said she was good for me, that I seemed happier. My friend group absorbed her seamlessly. Jordan's girlfriend, Melissa, started inviting both of us to dinner parties. Victoria fit into my life like she'd always been there. Looking back, that should have been the first warning sign. People don't integrate that perfectly, that quickly, unless they're working very hard to make it happen. The problem started small, almost imperceptibly. Jordan mentioned he'd texted me about a camping trip and I never responded. I checked my phone, no message. Showed him my messages, showed Victoria too because she was there when he brought it up. She suggested maybe the text didn't go through, network issues happen. Jordan shrugged it off but seemed slightly hurt, said it was fine, they'd planned the trip without me. A month later, Rachel mentioned I'd missed our mom's birthday dinner. I hadn't missed it, nobody told me about it. Rachel showed me the group text chain where she'd sent the details. My contact was in the thread. I'd never received a single message. Victoria was sympathetic, said my phone must be glitching, offered to take it to get checked. I let her. She came back saying the technician couldn't find any issues but had reset some settings. The messages from Rachel and my mom started coming through after that. Too late, though. Mom was hurt, I'd missed her birthday, thought I'd been ignoring the family. Things escalated over the next 6 months, slowly enough that I didn't connect the pattern. Melissa stopped inviting us to dinner parties. When I asked Jordan why, he got uncomfortable, said Melissa felt like I'd been dismissive of her career, that Victoria had mentioned I'd made comments about marketing being a fake job for people who couldn't do real work. I never said that, never even thought it. Melissa was brilliant at what she did. I tried to call her, got voicemail, left messages apologizing for whatever misunderstanding had happened. She never called back. Jordan grew distant, stopped suggesting we hang out, stopped responding to my texts about weekend plans. I asked Victoria if she knew what was going on. She said Jordan had mentioned to her that I seemed stressed lately, maybe too busy with work to maintain friendships, that maybe I should focus on my career and our relationship, rather than forcing connections that weren't working. It sounded reasonable at the time. I was stressed. I was busy. Maybe I had been neglecting my friendships. My relationship with Cameron deteriorated next. We'd always been close, talked multiple times a week, had standing plans for basketball games and hiking trips. Then he got engaged to Natalie, and everything changed. Or that's how Victoria explained it. She said Cameron was in that phase where new relationships consume everything, that it was normal for siblings to drift during major life transitions. But the drift felt wrong. Cameron stopped answering calls, declined invitations to grab lunch. When I finally cornered him at a family gathering, he was cold, barely spoke to me. I asked what was wrong. He said he didn't appreciate me talking shit about Natalie, that families should support each other, not tear each other down. I had no idea what he was talking about. He wouldn't elaborate, just said Victoria had told him about the things I'd said, the concerns I'd raised about Natalie's motives and her sketchy past. I'd never raised concerns about Natalie, barely knew her, thought she seemed great for Cameron. I tried to explain this. Cameron didn't want to hear it, said Victoria wouldn't lie about something like that. I confronted Victoria that night, calmly, carefully, trying not to sound accusatory, told her what Cameron had said. She looked shocked, wounded, said she'd mentioned I seemed stressed and worried about Cameron rushing into marriage, which was true. I had expressed that worry to her privately when Cameron got engaged after dating Natalie for 6 months. But she swore she'd never said I talked shit about Natalie specifically, said Cameron must have misunderstood, must have been defensive about his relationship, and twisted what she'd said. It sounded plausible. Cameron was defensive about Natalie. They had moved fast. Maybe he'd projected his own anxieties onto my casual concerns. I apologized to Victoria for accusing her of lying. She accepted gracefully, said she understood why I was upset but that she'd never betray my trust like that. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The alternative was too disturbing. Rachel was next. My sister, my closest family member, the person I'd trusted my entire life. We'd been inseparable growing up, maintained that closeness into adulthood despite living in different cities. She lived in Boulder, made the drive to Denver regularly to have dinner, catch up, maintain the connection we'd always had. Then the visits stopped. Texts went unanswered. I'd call and she'd pick up but keep conversations short, surface level, ending them quickly with vague excuses about being busy. I drove to Boulder unannounced one Saturday, showed up at her apartment, forced the confrontation. Rachel answered the door but didn't invite me in, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, face cold. "What do you want, Nathan?" The way she said my name, like I was a stranger, made my stomach drop. I asked what I'd done. She laughed bitterly, asked if I was serious. Said Victoria had shown her the texts I'd sent, the ones where I'd called Rachel controlling and judgmental, said I needed space from her constant criticism. I'd never sent those texts, never written those words. I pulled out my phone, showed Rachel my message history with her. Clean, normal, nothing remotely like what she was describing. Rachel's face changed slightly, confusion mixed with the anger. She pulled out her own phone, showed me screenshots, messages from my number, my contact name, saying horrible things about her life choices, about her relationship with her girlfriend Sophie. Cruel, cutting messages I'd never written. My hands went numb. I could feel Victoria watching me, probably wondering if I'd make the connection. But I didn't. Not yet. I was too focused on trying to explain to Rachel that I hadn't sent those messages, that something was wrong with my phone, that someone must have accessed my account. Rachel looked at me like I was pathetic. "You can't even own your own words," she said. "You'd rather claim someone hacked your phone than just admit you wanted to cut me out." She closed the door. I stood there for 10 minutes before leaving, feeling like I'd been hollowed out. Victoria was waiting in the car, sympathetic, concerned, said she'd warned me about pushing Rachel on the girlfriend issue, that maybe I'd texted things I didn't remember while drinking. I hadn't been drinking, didn't text when drunk, but the messages existed, had to have come from somewhere. Work became the next battleground, though I didn't recognize it as such. My clinic director, Dr. Michael Foster, 23 years in sports medicine, called me into his office for a conversation about professionalism concerns. Apparently, multiple colleagues had reported I'd been making inappropriate comments about female staff members, creating an uncomfortable work environment. I was stunned. I'd never made inappropriate comments, had always maintained professional boundaries, prided myself on creating a respectful workplace. Dr. Foster seemed uncomfortable delivering the complaints, said he knew me well enough to doubt the reports, but that he had to take them seriously, given their number and specificity. 3 different staff members had filed concerns. I asked what I'd supposedly said. He couldn't provide specifics due to confidentiality, just said I needed to be more aware of how my words were perceived, that he was documenting the conversation but not taking formal disciplinary action at this time. I left his office feeling sick, tried to think through every interaction I'd had over the past months, couldn't identify anything remotely inappropriate. Mentioned it to Victoria that evening. She was sympathetic, but also slightly distant, like she was measuring her response carefully. Asked if maybe I'd been making jokes that didn't land well, if the stress of our relationship issues had impacted my behavior at work. The suggestion stung. I wasn't the kind of person who made boundary-pushing jokes, wasn't inappropriate, didn't create hostile environments, but 3 people had complained. That wasn't coincidence or misunderstanding. That was a pattern. Victoria suggested I apologize to the staff broadly, acknowledge the concerns without admitting specifics, show I was taking the feedback seriously. It seemed like reasonable advice. I followed it. Apologized at the next staff meeting for any comments that had made people uncomfortable, committed to being more mindful. Several colleagues looked confused. A few seemed satisfied. I noticed Victoria's colleague from her pharmaceutical company, someone she'd introduced me to at a work mixer, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The isolation completed itself over the next 4 months. Jordan stopped responding entirely. Cameron uninvited me from pre-wedding events. Rachel blocked my number. My parents started taking their cues from my siblings, growing distant, responding to my calls but never initiating contact. Work relationships remained professional but cold, everyone maintaining careful distance. My social circle contracted to Victoria, and a few acquaintances who didn't know me well enough to have opinions about whatever narrative was circulating. I didn't understand what was happening. Felt like I was losing my mind. Started questioning my own behavior, my memory, my judgment. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I'd been inappropriate, been a bad friend, been a toxic family member without realizing it. Victoria was the only person who stayed consistent, the only person who seemed to care. That should have been a red flag brighter than the sun. Instead, it made me more dependent on her. When you lose everyone else, you cling to whoever remains. The complete isolation made me vulnerable in ways I couldn't recognize. Victoria started making more decisions for our relationship, for my life, suggested I needed therapy for the stress and social issues I was experiencing, found me a therapist, Dr. Amanda Cross, licensed clinical psychologist, 15 years in practice. Dr. Cross was professional, thorough, asked good questions about my history and current struggles. I explained the situation as best I understood it. Lost friends, estranged family, work concerns, feeling like reality was shifting beneath me. She suggested I might be experiencing depression or anxiety that was impacting my relationships and perception. Prescribed medication, recommended twice-weekly sessions. The medication made me foggy, disconnected. Victoria said that was normal, that I needed to push through the adjustment period. I trusted her, had no one else to trust. 3 months into therapy, Victoria suggested we move in together. Said it would be good for me to have more support, that living alone was exacerbating my isolation issues. My lease was ending anyway, and her place was larger, in a better location. It made practical sense. I moved in on a Saturday in September, Jordan and Cameron notably absent from the process. Just me and hired movers and Victoria directing where everything should go. She'd already rearranged the apartment to accommodate my things, cleared closet space, made room in her life with the same calculated precision she'd used to enter it. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt smothered, but I pushed the feeling down, told myself I was lucky to have someone who cared this much, lucky to have anyone at all. Living together revealed patterns I'd missed before. Victoria would go through my phone regularly, claiming she was just checking the time or looking for her own phone, but I'd notice my messages would be open, my call history reviewed. She'd ask seemingly casual questions about people I'd talked to during the day, then get upset if the answers didn't match what she'd seen on my phone. She had access to my laptop, my email, my social media accounts. I'd never explicitly given her my passwords, but somehow she had them. Small things would change. Friend requests I'd accepted would be removed, messages would be deleted, my phone settings would be altered. When I'd mention these things, she'd suggest the medication was making me forgetful, that I was doing things and not remembering. It became easier to doubt myself than to question her. The final straw came in March, 8 months after moving in together. Cameron's wedding invitation arrived crossed out in red ink. The same day, I received an email from Dr. Foster informing me I was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into additional professionalism complaints. The same day, my mom called crying, saying she'd received a letter from me explaining why I wanted no further contact with the family, a letter I'd never written. I sat in the apartment with 3 pieces of evidence that my life was being systematically destroyed, and for the first time in 18 months, I let myself consider the impossible. Victoria was doing this, all of it. Every lost friendship, every family conflict, every work complaint, every message I never sent. She'd had access to my phone, my computer, my accounts. She'd had opportunity, and she'd had motive, though I couldn't understand what it was. Control, possession, some need to isolate me completely until she was the only person in my world? I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I did something I should have done months ago. I went to someone who knew me well enough to recognize truth from manipulation, Rachel's girlfriend, Sophie. I'd met her a handful of times before everything fell apart, liked her immediately, respected how she supported Rachel. Sophie was a journalist for a Denver alternative weekly, specialized in investigative features, had the kind of skeptical mind that questioned narratives. I showed up at her office unannounced, probably looking wild-eyed and desperate. She ushered me into a conference room, listened while I spilled everything. The timeline, the lost relationships, the messages I never sent, Victoria's constant presence and access. Sophie took notes without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question that changed everything. Do you have any proof? I didn't. That was the problem. Everything Victoria had done was invisible, deniable, designed to look like my own actions or natural relationship deterioration. But Sophie understood how abusers operate. She'd covered domestic violence cases, written about coercive control, knew the patterns. She suggested we build evidence before confronting Victoria or anyone else. Suggested I document everything, change all my passwords without Victoria knowing, monitor for suspicious activity. She also suggested I stop taking the medication Dr. Cross had prescribed, see if the fog lifted. I was hesitant about that. Stopping psychiatric medication without medical supervision is dangerous. But Sophie pointed out that Victoria had found Dr. Cross, had been present for all my early sessions, had access to my medical records through the online portal. What if the medication itself was part of the control? What if I didn't actually need it? I tapered off the medication over 2 weeks, telling Victoria I was just adjusting dosage per Dr. Cross's instructions. The fog started lifting. I felt sharper, more alert, more like myself than I had in months, and with that clarity came observation. I started noticing Victoria's patterns, how she'd wait until I was in the shower or asleep to use my phone, how she'd volunteer to handle my mail, my bills, my administrative tasks, how she'd position herself as indispensable while isolating me from everyone else. I bought a new phone, kept it hidden, used it to document everything. Started taking screenshots of my actual message history with people, comparing it to what Victoria claimed I'd sent. Set up hidden cameras in the apartment using equipment Sophie lent me. Small devices disguised as everyday objects. Felt insane doing it. Felt necessary. The cameras caught her within a week. I watched footage of Victoria sitting at my laptop while I was at work, composing emails from my account to family members. Watched her go through my phone, delete messages, alter contacts. Watched her log into my work email, send messages to colleagues that would undermine my credibility. She wasn't just destroying my relationships. She was doing it methodically, with planning and precision. Each action calculated to isolate me further, make me more dependent, remove any support system that might help me recognize what was happening. I saved everything, backed it up in multiple locations, sent copies to Sophie. Then I made a plan. The confrontation required preparation. I couldn't just show Victoria the videos and expect her to admit anything. People who operate like she did don't confess when caught, they escalate. Sophie helped me contact authorities first, built a case file with the video evidence, the pattern documentation, testimonials from people Victoria had manipulated. We contacted Detective James Carver, Denver PD, 13 years in domestic violence and stalking cases. He reviewed everything with the careful attention of someone who'd seen similar patterns before, said what Victoria was doing constituted criminal harassment, identity theft, possibly stalking depending on how we framed it, but he needed more, needed evidence of intent, of awareness that her actions were harmful, needed her to incriminate herself. We set up a controlled confrontation. Detective Carver and another officer waited in an unmarked car outside the apartment. Sophie was on video call from her office, watching and recording. I had my new phone recording audio in my pocket. When Victoria came home from work that evening, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, video evidence queued up. She knew immediately something was wrong. Her face changed, mask slipping for just a second before she recovered, forced a smile, asked what was going on. I played the first video. Her, at my laptop, composing an email to Cameron from my account. Watched her watch herself. Her expression cycled through denial, confusion, anger, finally settling on something cold and calculating. You set up cameras in our home, she said. Not a question, an accusation. Not addressing what she'd been caught doing, attacking me for discovering it. I played more videos. Her deleting messages on my phone, her logging into my work email, her composing the letter to my mother, each one showing systematic, intentional sabotage. When the videos ended, silence filled the apartment. Victoria stood near the door, evaluating her options. I could see her weighing whether to deny, whether to minimize, whether to attack. She chose attack, said I was paranoid, abusive, that filming her without consent was illegal in Colorado, that she'd been trying to help me manage my life because the medication and therapy weren't working, said I'd been spiraling for months, hurting people, that she'd been trying to protect my family and friends from my increasingly erratic behavior by limiting contact. It was a good defense. Would have been convincing if I didn't have 18 months of video evidence showing deliberate, calculated sabotage. I asked her why. That was the question I needed answered more than any other. Why dedicate so much energy to destroying my life? She laughed, actually laughed, said I still didn't understand. You were supposed to need me, she said. You were supposed to be grateful. Instead, you kept trying to fix things, kept trying to reach out to people who didn't want you. You couldn't just accept that I was all you needed. The confession was chilling. She'd isolated me because my independence threatened her, had destroyed every relationship I valued to make herself indispensable. When I'd moved in with her, she'd thought she'd won, but I'd kept trying to reconnect with family, kept trying to understand what went wrong, kept being a person rather than the dependent project she wanted me to be. So she'd escalated. More complaints at work, more fabricated messages, more bridges burned, trying to complete the isolation until I had no choice but to be entirely hers. Detective Carver came in during the confession. Victoria's face went white when she saw the badge. She tried to recover, said she wanted a lawyer, that she wasn't saying anything else, but she'd already said enough. The videos showed intent. Her confession provided context. Carver arrested her for criminal harassment, identity theft, and stalking. Read her rights while she stood in our shared living room, hands cuffed behind her back, face contorted with rage. She looked at me as they led her out, not with regret or remorse, with pure hatred, like I'd betrayed her by refusing to stay isolated, like I was the villain in this story for wanting connections beyond her. That look clarified everything. Whatever I'd thought she felt for me, whatever I'd believed our relationship was, I'd been fundamentally wrong. She didn't love me. She'd been keeping me. The aftermath was complicated and painful and necessary. With Detective Carver's help, I contacted everyone Victoria had manipulated, showed them the evidence, explained what had been done in my name. Some believed immediately, relieved to have the cognitive dissonance resolved. Jordan cried when he saw the videos, apologized for abandoning me, said he'd known something felt wrong but couldn't identify what. Melissa was devastated she'd believed the lies so easily. Others took longer to accept the truth. Cameron struggled with it, wanted to believe I'd been complicit somehow, that I'd let this happen. My mother couldn't process that someone would go to such lengths for control, kept asking why Victoria would do such a thing, as if understanding the psychology would make the betrayal less real. Rachel was different. When I showed her the evidence, she went quiet for a long moment. Then she asked why I'd come to Sophie instead of coming to her directly. I explained I'd tried. She wouldn't talk to me. She said she meant earlier, before everything fell apart. Why hadn't I asked for help the first time something felt wrong? I didn't have a good answer. Pride, maybe. Denial. The insidious way Victoria had made questioning her feel like betraying our relationship. Rachel listened to all of it, then pulled me into the kind of hug we hadn't shared in over a year. "I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to reach you," she said. "I should have known you'd never say those things. Should have trusted you over the evidence." I told her the evidence had been convincing, that Victoria had been careful and calculating and good at what she did, that none of this was Rachel's fault, but the guilt in her eyes said she didn't believe me yet. Rebuilding took time. I moved out of Victoria's apartment immediately, stayed with Rachel and Sophie while I found a new place, returned to Dr. Foster with the evidence, explained the harassment, the fabricated complaints. He placed me on paid leave while HR conducted an investigation, contacted the staff members who'd filed complaints. Turned out Victoria had impersonated me on several occasions, shown up at the clinic claiming to deliver lunch, had access to staff schedules and personal information through her pharmaceutical sales connections. The complaints hadn't been about me, they'd been about someone pretending to be me. Dr. Foster apologized, said the clinic should have investigated more thoroughly, offered me my position back with additional security measures in place. I accepted, needed the stability, the routine, the reminder that I was good at something. Victoria's trial took 8 months. Her attorney tried to argue mutual toxicity, said I'd been controlling, and that she'd been responding to emotional abuse. The video evidence made that defense impossible. 18 months of footage showing calculated sabotage, showing her accessing my accounts, showing her composing messages and emails designed to destroy relationships. Her attorney also tried to suppress the confrontation video, arguing I'd recorded her without consent, but Colorado's recording law allows single-party consent for audio, and the video cameras were in my residence, legal with or without her knowledge. The judge denied the motion to suppress. The evidence stood. The prosecutor, Richard Stern, District Attorney's Office, 21 years prosecuting domestic violence and harassment cases, built a compelling case around coercive control, showed the pattern of isolation, the systematic destruction of support networks, the financial dependence Victoria had tried to create by sabotaging my career. Expert witnesses testified about domestic abuse dynamics, about how isolation is often a precursor to more severe forms of violence. Victoria's defense tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone seeking revenge for a bad relationship, but the evidence told a different story. This wasn't a bad breakup. It was calculated psychological abuse. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, found her guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, permanent restraining order, mandatory counseling. It wasn't enough for what she'd taken from me, but it was something. The person who loved me enough to stay through all of it wasn't romantic, wasn't dramatic, wasn't the kind of relationship that makes for satisfying narrative closure. It was Rachel, my sister, who'd been driven away by lies but came back when presented with truth, who'd opened her home to me, helped me rebuild, pushed me to reconnect with family and friends even when it was uncomfortable, who'd refused to let Victoria's influence be permanent, refused to let the isolation she'd created become my identity. Rachel didn't save me through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. She saved me by being consistently present, by choosing to believe me when belief was difficult, by loving me enough to fight through manufactured distance and reclaim our relationship. Sophie contributed too. Her investigative skills and instinct for truth-seeking had been essential to building the case against Victoria. But more than that, her willingness to listen to a desperate stranger and help without question had given me the first handhold back to sanity. She'd believed me when I had no proof, had helped me gather evidence when everyone else had written me off. After the trial, Sophie wrote a feature for her paper about coercive control and isolation in intimate partner abuse, changed my name, protected my identity, but told the story accurately. The piece won a regional journalism award. More importantly, it prompted 3 other victims of similar abuse to come forward, to report their partners, to seek help. Victoria hadn't just targeted me. I'd been one in a pattern spanning years, but I'd been the first one to gather enough evidence to prosecute successfully. Recovery is ongoing. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, I'm still rebuilding relationships, still working through trauma in therapy with a new therapist I found independently. Dr. Olivia Tran, licensed trauma specialist, 8 years working with domestic violence survivors. She doesn't prescribe medication without extensive evaluation, doesn't have connections to anyone in my life, doesn't have access to my accounts or personal information. The boundaries feel necessary and healing. Some friendships survived the reconstruction better than others. Jordan and Melissa are back in my life, though things aren't quite the same as before. There's a wariness now, a recognition that relationships can be weaponized, that trust requires verification. Cameron and I are slowly rebuilding. He apologized for believing Victoria so easily, for not questioning why I'd supposedly changed so dramatically. The apology helped, but the relationship has scars that may never fully heal. My parents struggled the most with accepting what happened. They're from a generation that doesn't easily process psychological abuse as seriously as physical violence. They understand Victoria did bad things, hurt me deliberately, but they don't fully grasp the systematic nature of it, the planning, the calculation. Don't understand how someone can dedicate 18 months to destroying another person's life with such methodical precision. I've stopped trying to make them understand completely. Enough that they believe me, that they're back in my life, that we're rebuilding connection. Complete understanding isn't required for love to function. Work remains complicated. Dr. Foster kept me employed, but colleagues who believed the initial complaints remain uncertain. Some apologized when the truth came out. Others maintained distance, unwilling to admit they'd been fooled or uncomfortable with the reminder that they'd believed lies about me so easily. I get it. Nobody wants to confront how easily they can be manipulated, how quickly they'll believe the worst about someone they thought they knew. It's easier to maintain distance than to process that discomfort. So I focus on the patience, on the work itself, on being excellent at what I do. Slowly, reputation rebuilds through demonstration rather than explanation. Victoria will be released in 14 months. I've prepared for it as much as possible. Updated security, kept documentation of the restraining order, maintained contact with Detective Carver. Rachel has promised she and Sophie will be there, that I won't face Victoria's release alone. The fear is real. People who operate like Victoria did don't reform easily. Prison gives them time to plan, to refine strategies, to nurse grievances. But I'm not the same person she isolated and controlled. I have support now, have people who love me enough to stay, have learned to recognize red flags, to trust my instincts, to document everything. If she tries again, I'll be ready. And if she doesn't, if prison genuinely changed her trajectory, then I'll have done the work of preparing for nothing, which would be fine, better than the alternative. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.